Hi, this is Britton Beisenherz, and you're watching Time to Connect.
Hey, Britton Beisenherz, how are you doing, man?
Hey, John, I'm doing well. How you
Thank
doing?
you. Thank you so much for taking the time to connect. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
You bet, man. You are a busy man. I gather just from our correspondence that you tend to stay pretty busy. Is that true?
That is true, and it's been a really particularly busy year. 2023 just kind of got started with a bang, and yeah, between the studio schedule and travel and family, it's pretty nonstop around here.
Yeah, and the studio is you doing a lot right now. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah, I've got this list actually over here because I don't, it's hard to keep track of what all's going on. But I just last week had Alec Unsworth in for most of the week. Clap your hands, say yeah, um, front man, and we did most of last week doing some piano and vocal versions of Clap Your Hands songs, and
Nice.
then I had a guy named Aaron Davis, great artist from Wyoming, in to do a few songs. Just I've got so many records in the can right now. There's a Jenny Carson EP that I'm really excited about. There's Graham Weber who's been on Time to Connect. We've got one in the can called Old Young Man that
Oh yeah.
uh, it was a joy to make that record, and that one's just awaiting release. Will Johnson and we've got one finished up, mastered, waiting for release, but he's going to run off and join Jason Isbell's band for a little bit. So we're waiting on the release of that one. And yeah, just had a session with a band called McMercy Family Band on Saturday. It's got members of Little Mazarn and a bunch of different Austin Wilson Marks is in that group, and we're doing an entire covers record of the Leuven Brothers, one of the Leuven Brothers records, which has been a lot of fun. Real talented musicians in that group, and yeah, gosh, I've got one in the can with an artist named Carter Hogan, and that went real well, and Nicole Hale, and I'm sure I'm leaving some out, but it's oh,
Yeah.
I just finished a 37-minute instrumental record with a band called Meat Belt, which is the oddest band name, but and the music, it's more like Explosions in the Sky
Uh,
kind of style music, but the name cracks me up. Meat Belt.
Meat belt. Yeah.
Meat Belt was in recently, so yeah, it's nonstop.
Wow.
Uh,
Yeah, man, I want to get into, kind of the origins of Ramble Creek, how that happened eventually here. But let's back up a little bit. I will have put in the show notes links and just basic stuff, mentioning that you're a musician, composer, recording engineer, producer, and the proprietor of Ramble Creek Recording Studio. But let's start with a little biographical kind of talk. Where are you from? What are some of the highlights of your life that led you to where you are right now? What's your past been like?
oh boy. Well, I'm from Dallas, Texas. I was born in Presbyterian Hospital off of Greenville Avenue on May 16th, 1975. Today is my 48th birthday,
It is your
actually.
birthday today. Now, this
Um,
episode won't go live for a while, but happy birthday. I just had mine 5 days ago. So,
oh, right on. Happy birthday.
yeah,
Couple
you
of
too, man.
toasts here,
You too.
shooting the bull. Yeah, so 1975 and 48. What led me? So I saw the high school band, Lake Highlands High School band, came to the cafeteria of my elementary school, Skyview Elementary School, when I was in fifth grade to recruit for band and orchestra. And they played, I don't know what they played, but I was just smitten immediately
Mm,
with
mm.
the group and the big sound. And I joined the band on saxophone for my sixth grade year, uh, and just really enjoyed. I played sixth through 11th. I didn't want to march in 12th grade, so I left the band for senior year. But and then somewhere in there around seventh or eighth grade, I started playing guitar and just kind of fell in love with
Mm.
with music, my mom always listened to a lot of music. My aunt introduced me to she gave me a bunch of vinyl records in 7th grade, introduced me to the Beatles and Stones and Hendrix and a lot of classic rock. And I kind of, in parallel to that, got real into shoegazy Brit rock like Cure, New Order, Smiths,
Sure.
Spiritualized, those kinds of bands. And so I've always liked a lot of British stuff.
How old
Even
were
this,
you? How old were you when you kind of knew that music was going to be your livelihood?
well, I think I knew that it was my primary passion really early on. My dad is very pragmatic. He's a mathematician, actuary type, and he spent a lot of time in my youth reminding me that music is no way to make a living, and that it's just not a good life. And so he encouraged me to do anything, but it's a hobby. He always just told me it's a hobby. Don't try and pursue a life of music. And so I went to UT out of high school and kind of just I don't know. I was there for about a semester and a half before I dropped out, and ultimately kind of took a year off of school, and then I ended up at in Boston at Berklee College of Music. And
Wow.
um, during high school, I made a bunch of records with the band, that I was in, or a couple of records, and kind of fell in love with the studio, um, and then yeah, going to Boston and formalizing my music education, and meeting a bunch of really talented musicians. I think just kind of put me over the edge as far as trying to do something for a living in music.
Hmm.
But I don't think I really knew that that was going to stick until I was 25, until
Hmm.
2000 or so when I moved from Boston back to Austin, and started making a go at recording. And my wife, who I've been with for since high school, actually, was very supportive and let me use the house as a studio. Almost the entire house got converted to a studio over the course of a few years. We bought a house in Pflugerville, Texas, in 2000, um, which is just north of Austin, and that was it was on Ramble Creek Road, and that's where the studio name came from. And yeah, she slowly but surely just let me turn the whole damn house
Hmm.
into a studio, and that's kind of where it started. She worked at Dell, uh, and made a steady paycheck, and I got to collect equipment and make a go at making records.
Nice. What I'm curious, a lot of people that I know and I talk to uh, have that passion for music and kind of knew it would either be a really, really serious hobby or a livelihood, but not that many of them go the route of saying I want a recording studio. I want to be the guy that produces and records other people. And I know you play yourself. You played in, let's see, you played in Milton Mapes and Monahans. Is that right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Uh,
Do you know what it was
Before
that
that,
made
it
you
was
kind of take that turn?
uh, the recording
Yeah.
studio turn.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I've always liked recording stuff that of my own, but
Yeah.
I'm not really a songwriter. I certainly am not a singer. And I wanted to be able to work on compositions and have all the time in the world to do it. And so the studio really kind of started out for me, and for me to just learn and have all the time to work on compositions and recordings and experiment without having to pay for it hourly. So that's part of it.
Hmm.
Um, I also like collaborating and being able to work on a lot of different styles of music and different types of songs. And
Yeah.
you can learn a whole lot by diversifying the experiences and working with different people.
Hmm.
And it also just seemed like a good bet hedge. There's always going to be a need for even as home recording technologies get really good, and people can do pretty much everything on their own. There's always going to be the need for a place that has a killer mic collection, and
Yeah.
better pre's and compression, and
Yeah.
analog to digital conversion, and so it just seemed like a way to put an egg in the studio basket. And then I was in a band called Deadman before Milton Mapes, and then Mapes, which I joined kind of as we were making this Western Air record in the early 2000s.
Love
And
that
then
record.
uh thanks, that was kind of really where it really felt like it was viable to
Mm.
make a living. That record, we made it on a little Roland VS 1880 kind of standalone recorder, and it was a labor of love, and it really seemed to resonate with a lot of people, and it gave me a lot of confidence. Like, okay,
Yeah.
we can maybe make a go at this for real.
Right on. And I'm sure this really varies by who you're working with, but I'm just curious to get a sense of how much you get involved in terms of decisions on, hey, why don't we put harmonica right here, or why don't you put another chorus at the finish on another chorus, or those kind of decisions. I'm always fascinated by people like Rick Rubin, who supposedly does not play any music at all. He's just got a good ear, and
Mm.
and probably often I imagine he just sits back and lets it happen, but other times he'll just make that one little suggestion. How active do you get in terms of getting involved in those kind of decisions?
It really, like you said, it totally
Yeah.
depends on the group. When some people that I work with just know what they want. They don't need advice. They don't want advice
Hmm.
about, especially arrangements. I don't mess around with arrangements too much, except to shorten. I'm always looking to shorten a song. Anything over about 4.5 minutes might need a tighten up.
Hmm.
Unless it's depends on the composition, I guess. But in general, if I do mess with an arrangement, it's usually to shorten it a bit. Uh, as far as instrumentation ideas, those I have, and if I have an idea, uh, I tend to voice it. But after 23 years of making records, I've definitely in the last 10 or so gotten less and less stubborn and insistent upon my ideas having any weight at all. I don't care. If somebody's not into it, I'm not going to fight
Hmm.
for
Sure. Sure.
something anymore. I used to be, pretty insistent upon something that I thought was great idea, or and I'm less that way. Um, as far as I don't think you can engineer a record and not have a hand at the production. I think pretty much any recording and mix engineer should get a little co-production credit on just about any record that
Yeah.
exists out there. And I don't really think many people talk about that, or
Right.
accept the fact that the recording engineer, unless somebody is dictating what mic and the placement, and
Yeah.
the signal chain and all of that. That's all production to me. Production means, a couple of dozen things depending on, who you're talking to, that's something that I think that I've noticed over the years. There's no way that an engineer, isn't having a pretty big hand in the production of a recording, whether they ever get a production credit in the liner notes or not. So
One
I
of my
kind of quietly put my stamp on things without it doesn't get discussed, most of the time, and I'm pretty good with that.
one of my questions was going to be, what does the average person, even fairly serious music fan, not understand about the whole recording process and recording studios? But maybe is that your answer? The fact that they don't realize how much involvement someone like you really has.
Well, I mean, that sounds whiny, or I mean, it's not a complaint, I guess.
Right.
It's
Right.
just at all. It's just the way it is, or the way it is here.
Yeah.
Uh, I don't know how many records I've made, but one thing that I still am reminded of every time I start a record is it's never the same twice.
Yeah.
It's there is no process
Hmm.
for making a record, or at least not here. It really, for better or worse and worse, it feels like the first time every time. Uh,
Wow. That's
make a record.
great. That's
It is
fantastic.
great, but it's also
Keeps it fresh.
horrifying.
Okay.
You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
stressful. But I like, it's a good kind of stress. But I still am amazed when I play something back and it comes out of the speakers. I'm like, holy shit, this is
Right.
it's neat that we can do this. It's still fresh,
That's cool.
after all this time.
I just listened to Lucinda Williams read her autobiography on Audible, and fascinating book. And of course, we all know the sort of the horrifying stories behind Car Wheels and all the twists and turns that that record took. And I guess she probably made a few enemies there, or at least made a lot of people unhappy with her demands. But I'm curious, without naming names, of course, can you tell us any stories about just disasters you've had in the studio, if things just did not go well, or you had to pull the plug on a project or anything like that?
There, as far as can recall, there haven't been any that we've had to just completely,
Yeah.
abort. There there are artists that I have worked with and still work with that we butt heads, but it's out of love for the music. And I don't mind naming, well, Doug Burr is an artist out of Denton, Texas, that I've made 4 or 5 records with.
Hmm.
I love his music. A lot of people love his music. He's really a special songwriter. And he and I notorious, like, just every single record, there's a fight. Not a physical fight, but we'll yell at each other, which is really not normal around here. But he cares deeply about his songs, and I care deeply about his songs. But he gets real in the weeds with he has a tendency, like us, like all of us, to overthink our creations, and sometimes he'll there. When we were doing this record called On Promenade in 2005, we had done a song called Blood Runs Downhill, and just got real lucky with this penultimate version of this song. And that was kind of some of the last sessions at the previous studio before I moved to the location we're in now. And he actually graciously waited for this studio to be finished, and we finished Promenade here. And in the interim, he kind of reimagined Blood Runs Downhill, and got here, and we were doing some of the other songs on the record, and he announced during a session one day that he wanted to re-record Blood Runs Downhill, and I just wasn't having it. And so there was a whole band. I mean, it's like 6 people here, and I just remember turning out the lights in the control room and playing the version of Blood Runs Downhill that we had, and then I said something dramatic, like, I would rather. Well, I think I had everybody. I said, "Raise your hand if you think we can do a better version than that." Nobody but Doug raised their hand, and then I said, I would rather burn this place down than re-record that song."
I have a
And
feeling you won that argument.
I did, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the version that's on the record, and it's killer.
Yeah.
Uh, and
Um,
making there was another record. It might have been the Pale White Dove record, where just all of us were just irritated with each other, and Doug was real insistent upon some things, and at one point we had some argument, and he went outside, and he came back in a little while later, and he said, "I looked up at the stars and they didn't look back." And basically just saying he was having this crisis of uh you know creativity, and wanting it his way, but also realizing he might not be right about
mhm.
out the way to go about things on that particular day. So there's that. There, Doug is really the one that comes to mind where we, we clash, but at the end, the records that we make, I think are special. They mean a lot to me, and I think, and we're gonna do some. He contacted me about doing something later in the year, so we're pals. But we
If
definitely butt heads.
if you had to name a couple of records that came out of your studio that you're most proud of, what I know that's probably a Sophie's choice, but what comes to mind? Just
Yeah, there's so many that I love. They're like children, so it is like,
yeah,
it's hard to. Uh, I really like on Promenade. That's definitely up there. Western Air.
yeah,
These are old records, but that one has a special place. The Telegraph Canyon Tide in the Current record.
good record, man.
Means a lot to me. There's one that nobody knows about. There's this band called Robert Jones out of DFW. They were Booker, I think Booker T. Isn't that the arts magnet school? Yeah, they're Booker T kids. This photographer named Hal Samples brought me these. It's really two guys, but then they brought uh, a kid in, AJ something or other, to play bass. And it was Caleb Landry Jones, Robert Hudson, and AJ Durham, I think. And these were kids. I mean, AJ was 15, I think, at the time. Robert Hudson was 18, and I think Caleb was 19. And these kids just came in, and we made a record. They let me name it. It's called "Men and Their Horses," which was one of the songs. It's such a cool record that really they Caleb was going off to LA to act. He's an actor now, and Robert Hudson was going to Tennessee to go to college, and AJ was still in high school. But it was their kind of, they wanted to capture what they had been doing as a high school band and I think they started playing together maybe in middle school or before. Um, but we just made this record that I think it's on Bandcamp. Robert Jones. They took Robert Hudson's first name and Caleb Jones's last name and made that the band name. And Men and Their Horses is a really, it's a sleeper, but I think it's one of my favorite records I've ever gotten to work on, and we did it in 5 days, and they're just monstrously talented guys. That's way up there. I don't know. There are so many that I try not to let it get out there if it's not, good enough to be proud of. So,
Sure,
so
sure, sure.
I really love them all.
Did you
Like,
do the? I'm trying to remember. Did you do the Will Johnson, Jason Molina collaboration record?
I did not. Matt Pence recorded the
Okay,
Believe Johnson
okay,
record, um, and yeah, I mean, speaking of Will, for every record I make with Will Johnson feels
mhm,
special, and uh, his Hatteras record was just about as much fun to make
mhm,
as any.
yeah,
But no, I knew Molina from touring Mapes. I think we were Mapes at the time. The Mapes and Monahans, it's all the same guys.
same thing. Yeah.
Uh,
Why that change in name? Quick aside. Why do you remember why?
yeah, because Milton Mapes is Greg Vanderpool. I mean, the songs are his songs,
Yes,
and for
that's
the
his
most part,
grandfather's name, isn't it?
it is,
Yeah.
yeah. And so, at the end of the day, it was a collaborative process. But at the end of the day, if Greg wanted something to be done a certain way, or scrapped or added or whatever, it was Greg's band.
Gotcha.
Uh, and so which was great. He's a great songwriter, and made some really great records, and got to run around touring that material. But then Monahans is more of it's all the same fellas, but it was a more collaborative process. Still, a lot of the
Gotcha.
seeds came from Greg, and he certainly wrote all the lyrics. But it was agreed that it was going to be a much more, and ended up just being a much more collaborative
Gotcha.
process than Mapes
Yep.
was, as far as decision making and that sort of thing.
Right
And
on.
the music's quite different. We just kind of went from making the Americana. I don't know what to call Mapes, you know, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Monahans is a bit more landscape expansive, you know, landscape rock is what you used to call it.
Nice. Yeah. I have trouble with labels. You know, I mean, we have to use them, I guess, but uh, you know, it gets to be feeling cliche, Americana, folk rock. Uh, I don't know. It's kind of hard to stick with those things. Well, look, what was the? I'm curious, what was the pandemic like for a guy like you? I mean, that had to be. I mean, it was tough for a lot of people, obviously, and those of us who play live. That was really difficult. You were probably able to still do some work, but how was the pandemic for you?
You know, actually, early on, pretty. I don't leave here very much. I'm pretty introverted. I don't get out. I don't like crowds. You know, early on in the pandemic, it was kind of my dream come true. Aside from the people
Yes,
dying
yes,
and
I
being sick,
understand.
and that part, no
Sure.
bueno. But the excuse to behave the way I prefer to behave, locked in my own little world, it was great. But just like anything, when you're forced, when it stops being a choice and you're forced into lockdown,
Yeah.
that got old pretty quick. Just by virtue of the fact that I had to instead of you know, made a choice to be locked
Yeah.
up.
Yeah.
Um, Will and I made a record during 2020, kind of early-ish on in the pandemic, and Graham Weber and I made the Old Young Man record during that time, and I was still doing a lot of television composition at that time.
Hmm.
So I stayed busy. It wasn't work-wise. It wasn't a big deal.
Okay.
I didn't have people, bigger groups in the studio for most of 2020.
Hmm.
Those two records I just mentioned, it was pretty much, you know, Graham and I, and then I worked a lot on my own on that record, and then the El Capitan record that Will and I made. That was a week. Um, we pretty much recorded and mixed it, and we're done in a week
Hmm.
with that one. And then I spent most of that year on compositions, and then I've got some property out in Lampasas County. So I spent a lot of time out in the country, uh, cutting down cedar trees and mowing the grass and stuff.
Nice. And you mentioned some of the stuff you do some stuff for television and film. Is that right? Can tell us about that a
Yeah,
little bit.
more television than film. I'd love to do more film stuff, but yeah, I in 2012 I was approached by a fellow that worked for a production company that made television shows, um, asking if I thought I could do 80 pieces of music in 3 months for a show called Texas Car Wars. It's all reality TV, and you know, I've worked on at this point I've worked on about a dozen shows, and the one I enjoy working on the most is called My 600 Pound Life. It's on TLC, and uh it's on its 11th season, I guess now. So it's kind of, you know, it's done well. It's been around since about 2012. Um, but yeah, going back, I got approached to see if I could do these compositions for this Texas Car Wars show, and I enlisted a fella named Matt Powell, really great guitar player, multi instrumentalist, songwriter fella that helped, you know, came in, and over the course of, yeah, about 3 months, we composed and recorded, mixed and mastered 80 pieces of music for this show, and that gave me a, you know, the opportunity to work on another show. Shipping Wars, I think, was the next one, um, and then I started working on 600 Pound Life, and at this point, I've done about 750 compositions for television, and it's one of my favorite things to do ever. And so, yeah, that's that kind of what happens when you. I've done about 250 for 600 Pound Life, and they become a part of the brand of the show. So once you saturate, you know, they're not asking for any more compositions for that show because it's they're just they reuse. You
Mhm.
know, it's in acts. There's 4 acts per episode, and there's a certain set of compositions for each act, and um, they've got choices, and they trade them out. It's not like the music's exactly the same for every episode, but they've
Sure.
got their set of compositions for each act, and at this point, it's pretty well saturated. And so I haven't done as much television composition in the last couple of years as between 2012 and 2021. It was just nonstop splitting my time between making records with other artists and then spending my time alone in here. Once we got past the the music for like 600, I mean, for Texas Car Wars and Shipping Wars, it was a lot of really gunslinging guitar work and stuff that honestly I'm just not capable of doing. And once it got to stuff like 600 and another show called Skin Tight, and I did a show for music for a UFOs, the Lost Evidence show, and that was all stuff that I could do on my own. And I enjoy, like I said, the alone time. So, and then you get about the time I would get sick of myself and lonely, it was time to do a record with a band. And then when I got sick of people, then it was time to do more composition work. And that's kind of what I've been doing, bouncing back and forth since 2012, doing TV work and then records. And,
And you do stay busy, man. That's a lot. Well, who would you list as some of the more influential musicians on you, either as a just as a musician or as a producer? Who are some of the musicians that you think of, especially early on in your life, that were kind of big for you?
um, I mean, I fall in the school of people who think the Beatles, is one of the greatest, maybe the greatest rock band of all time. So they've been they're a big influence. I like I said, I like a lot of Brit. My favorite record in the world is probably the Stone Roses self-titled
It's a great record, man.
debut. It's so good, and the
Yeah.
remaster is you can hear the bass a lot better now.
Mm.
It's if you haven't heard the remastered version, it's better. Um, I love the production of Dan Lenoir. Records like "Oh Mercy" and "Time Out of Mind" by Bob Dylan, and "Teatro" by Willie Nelson, and Emmylou Harris's "Wrecking Ball," the Peter Gabriel "Us" record, and so and the U2 stuff is as you know cheesy as U2 has become. Those first those records all the way. I'm all in on U2 until Zoorope, until well up to and including Zoorope, even some of Pop. I think is pretty great. But yeah, I like Lenoir's production. I like T-Bone Burnett's production a lot.
Hmm.
But I
Hmm.
don't really seek to emulate anybody else. I don't really. I'm not good at copycat or sounding. I don't really know how those guys do what they do, or how they get the sounds that they get. I'm not really striving for to sound like them. And Dan Lenoir in particular really has a sound. And while I find his production, especially early on, I was really into those records and the sounds of those records. I'm not really trying to emulate
Hmm.
anybody. I tend to take an approach uh, to make an artist sound like the artist, not
Mm.
like Ramble Creek or like what I think the artist should
Hmm.
sound like.
That said, do you ever, when you're talking to a band, um, and talking about kind of their vision for a record, do you ever ask them to list for you particular records that they like the sound of, so that you can kind of get an
I
idea?
do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. Just so I can get a sense if they like things really dry or really verby, or it's more to know what not to do. And so I don't, bum people out with choices that are counter to what they're interested in.
Hmm.
Um, I don't tend to listen to it if I don't listen to artists' previous records. If I hadn't already, I mean, there are cases where I was already listening because I'm a fan or whatever. But if I'm unaware of a band or a songwriter's work and they give me all their previous records, I almost never listen to them because I don't. We're not trying to make that record again. We made that record, or
Right.
you made that record. I'm not
Right.
really interested in, you know, being influenced by an artist's previous work. Ideally each record is better than the one before, and if not better, hopefully just as good and not the same.
Yeah, right on
So
that makes sense, man. Well, let me move to some kind of rapid fire questions, and the idea here is short answer, but if if you're inspired to give a longer answer, absolutely, that's fine. Uh, what do you like most about living in Austin?
the musicians that live in Austin, or that
Yeah,
the availability of good
yeah.
performers and writers, and you know
What do you like least about living in Austin?
the growth. It's
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 crazy, man.
changed so dramatically in the last 10 years. I think we've gained 30% of our population in the last decade or so, which is staggering, a little unhealthy maybe.
Yeah, we moved to Texas my senior year of high school in 1974, and I discovered Austin pretty quickly and fell in love with it. Uh, but it took me 20 years to move there. So I moved there in 94. And the first song I wrote when I moved there, the opening line was Los Angeles has moved to Austin. And that was 94. So,
Right.
and just since then, yeah, you know, it has changed a lot. Well, favorite restaurant in Austin?
Oh boy. My new favorite restaurant, I think this place called La Posada on William Cannon across from Westgate Lanes. It's been there for a while, but I didn't know about it. Jenny Carson, this great songwriter I just worked with, turned me onto this place, and I'm real into it. It's just legit
Cool. Cool.
X-Mex.
So if not music, what? If you, I mean, it's an impossible question, but what would you do with your life if it couldn't have been music?
Uh, that's a great question. I would probably like to be out in the country, maybe raising cattle or something.
Okay. And man, I've written down a number of records here that I'm going to check out. So you can choose one of those or a different one. But if I had told you you could only listen to one record for the next, let's say the next month, that's the only record you can listen to, what would it be?
A record that I keep coming. So Tom Waits released this Orphans record, and it's really three records, and I like all three of them. They're oddball, but the middle one is called Ballers. Uh, I can't get enough of that. I listen to it all the time, and I would be fine just listening to that for a month.
Cool. Um, what about Bob Dylan? You mentioned the Beatles, and I always tell people a lot of it's a function of my age, but Dylan and Lennon were the two probably early on most influential people to make me so obsessed with music. But how do you think of Dylan? What has he meant to you?
I love Bob Dylan. I was pretty late to the game. I got into Bob Dylan through the record Time Out of Mind, which I believe was released in 96, maybe 95. Um, I love that record. And then I kind of went backwards and got into Oh Mercy, which was 1989, also produced by Lenoir. And then I went back to Highway 61 Revisited was probably my next favorite, and Blonde on Blonde, Blood on Tracks. So
Yeah.
I kind of went backwards. There's not many Bob Dylan records that I don't love. Even Knocked Out Loaded, which is not a great record, has Brownsville Girl on it, and I love that song, and
Yeah.
got one of my favorite lyrics about
Didn't he co-write that with Sam Shepard?
oh, I don't know, maybe he
I
did.
think
Uh,
he did. I think he did.
okay, it's a
Yeah.
great song. Talk about, I mean, it's it's long. It's like 8 or 9 minutes long, which usually drives me crazy. But the lyrics, and it's a great story, and it just gets me every time. Yeah, Bob Dylan means a whole lot to me, and I love his music. Um, Love and Theft, I thought, was also a really great record after Time Out of Mind. He's still kind of doing it
Mhm.
uh, pretty well. Um, so yeah, I'm a fan. I'm a big
Cool.
fan.
Cool. Books. Are you much of a reader?
Not as much as I'd like to be.
Any particular books come to mind as important books to you in your life?
Yeah, well, I went through a sci-fi phase. I love William Gibson, Neuromancer,
Mhm.
Mona Lisa, Mona Lisa Overdrive and Count Zero. And so yeah, I like his books a lot. I think it's uncool or unpopular to say at this point, but I still, and it's a short, silly book, but I really like Catcher in the Rye, which I
Yeah,
think,
great book.
you know, I don't
Yeah.
know if that's cool to say anymore, but I do. I like that book a lot, and I've read it a number of times. Uh, my son is an avid reader. He reads, 50 or so books a year, and I'm jealous of his discipline. And I read a
Yeah,
lot of technical manuals, and
sure.
that the kind of stuff I read is, you know, pretty dry.
Yeah, yeah.
And then I read too much news and that kind of stuff. But I need to parlay that into reading books. That would be better for my mental health. Probably.
Yeah, step away from the news, man. It'll drive you crazy. Well, let's see.
Start every day.
How about pet peeves? What pisses you off?
Uh, Pet peeves driving in Austin. Just there are more supercars and all these Dodge Chargers and Mustangs and whatnot on the road now. Mopac going 110 miles an hour. That pisses me off, especially since my son's now
Yeah,
driving, and I worry about him, not because he's a great driver, but it's everybody else that and the amount that all of us are on our phone is a huge pet peeve of mine.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's been a profound change for sure. Well, if you had I don't know, a nephew or some young person who said that their goal in life is to create a studio, a recording studio, and make that their life, what would be, some advice you'd give them starting out?
Boy. I would say just do it. Don't wait until you have the finest
Hmm.
gear. And I'd say be prepared to work, you know, 80, 90 hour weeks for a decade or so, and work harder than anyone else, and maybe it'll work out for you. I would not want to start from scratch in 2023 the way that I did in the late 90s.
Yeah,
It's a different industry, it's a different ball game, and I don't envy folks that are, starting out and interested in making a go at any of the industry stuff, songwriting, composition, studio. It seems like it would be harder now than ever to make a living at this stuff uh, with the devaluation of intellectual property, and how easy it is for people to make great stuff in their bedrooms and
yeah,
whatnot. I just, you know, I hesitate to say. I think I would tell it my nephew or niece, or, maybe don't do it. I'd be like my dad.
yeah.
It's a hobby.
All right, man. Well, hey, just a couple more questions. Do you have when things are tough for you, do you have any particular guiding philosophy or spiritual leanings or meditation or anything or is it just getting lost in music when things are tough for you?
I Things are always tough. It's hard to be alive. It's hard to be a human. So I think I fall back on music and making music and getting lost in the creativity. I'm not a particularly happy I'm happy with my life. I love my family and all that, but it's hard to be around, so
Yeah.
I'm always kind of sad. But I think that's also fuel for the creativity.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm content with my discontent.
I think there was a study, I'm not sure. I think this might be one of the happiness studies that came out of Harvard, and I'm probably getting this wrong. It was probably one particular person who talked about being the difference between being happy in your life versus being happy with your life. Kind of in the moment, day to day, are you happy? But then when you sit back and think about, put it in perspective, I think that's two very different things. And it's, uh, I find it both pretty challenging these days, as you said. I mean, it's a weird world we're living in, man.
It is, and if I take a step back or when I do, I'm so grateful, and I wouldn't change a thing about
Right.
anything.
Yeah.
Things, you change one little parameter, and maybe some of the,
Yep.
some of the luck and whatever goes away. But yeah, just in any given day to day moment, I I don't know that I want to be content. I feel like that will breed complacency, or I'm very happy and very lucky, but I'm not one of those people that can choose joy. I a lot of my friends can. I'm pretty jealous of that skill, but I don't possess that.
So you just had a birthday. I don't, and I'm quite a bit older than you, but I, as as every time I have a birthday, I realize I only have so many left. Right? Do you contemplate the finitude of this life? Do you think about what happens when we die and the fact that we only have so much time? And is that something you've devoted much time thinking about?
It's one of the main things I think about. Yeah, I spend a great deal of time um, thinking about that. I'm not afraid of death, I am pretty certain that there's something beyond this world. But and I spent probably the first 30 years of my life just destroying myself, and so I worried about health stuff for a long time, and uh, I don't as much anymore because I've had enough clean bills of health to where I'm like, okay, I made it through that, and
Mhm.
looks like I'm relatively unscathed. But there was a time when I kind of obsessed over the
Well,
finite nature, and worried about maybe going away
mhm.
before I was ready, or at a younger age. And now, I feel like maybe I'm through the woods. Maybe I'll make it to.
Yeah, the older we get, the older our chances are, or the better our chances are of living a long life.
Right.
You mentioned that you're pretty sure something happens beyond. There is something beyond. Do you have any particular speculation about that? And is it? I'm always intrigued by the idea. People respond to that question sometimes by talking about energy. It doesn't really get destroyed, and that they feel like there is something beyond that. The one thing that really interests me is consciousness. I mean, that's one thing that we don't understand what consciousness is. We still don't understand as much as we understand about the world. Scientists don't really understand consciousness, and I always wonder. It doesn't seem like it would, but is there in some way our consciousness goes beyond death?
Right. Well, I think what you just said about energy, not, can't be created nor destroyed, or I I've always found it kind of funny that science and religion are so, a lot of people see them as opposed to one another, whereas I think they're completely compatible. I don't see why science can't just be an explanation
Yeah.
for a higher powers methodology. Why can't, it, if you're a fundamentalist, if you believe that the Bible is literal, uh, then of course science and religion do become incompatible. But if it's more of a story and a metaphor, then I think science and religion are very compatible. Um, am in a point in my life where I am irritated with the unintended side effects of organized religion, and kind of how some people interpret parts of the Bible, and how it can cause bad behavior, and you know bad logic. And
Yeah.
so I've kind of stepped away a little bit organized religion, but I still very much have a faith in something beyond. I kind of need to believe in. There's got to be something beyond humans. There's got to be something better, smarter. Uh,
Yeah.
because it's a depressing thought to think that we're the penultimate, being that.
Yeah.
I would be okay with that.
Okay, man. Last question. Thank you so much for doing this. Last question. If you could write your own epitaph or imagine what people you would love people to be saying about you after you do pass, what comes to mind?
Oh boy. Tried his hardest. You know, I think we're all just doing the best that we can, and I just hope that when I'm gone, people recognize that that I tried to do something, and
Well, man,
whether that's what I did or not, I tried.
you are doing a lot. You're staying busy. You're making a lot of great records there. I've talked to several people who know you, and they all speak very highly of you. I really appreciate you taking this time. I've enjoyed talking to you, man.
Likewise, thank you for having me.
All right, we'll see you down the road. Take care.